Hello and welcome to Podjunction podcast, where podcasters learn to grow their business. I'm Sadaf, Beynon, and with me is Matt Edmundson.
Greetings.
And salutations.
And salutations. Yeah, absolutely.
So today we are going to be listening in on a segment with Jason Greenwood, who is the host of the Ecommerce Edge podcast.
Very good.
And he's going to be talking about his evolution from a solo format to a interview-driven show.
Very good. So and Jason's a cool bloke too.
Yeah, you've interviewed him on...
Yeah, on one of the podcasts. EP,
yeah.
Or was it Push? I can't remember. It all merges.
Ecommerce.
Of course it was. We talked about e-commerce. What a wally. But yes, I'm looking forward to this. Do you know where the phrase greetings and salutations come from? Can you name the movie?
No, I've only heard it from you.
Okay, so if you're listening to the podcast and you're going, I know that movie that you've sort of robbed that from... Just write it in. I was going to say write in the comments, but we're not live streaming. So just to make a mental note as I do the big reveal, the movie is Demolition Man. Yes, it is. The 1980s movie, or 1990s? 1980s, with Sandra Bullock and Sylvester Stallone, where the guy goes, greetings and salutations. And for some reason, after watching that movie, it stuck.
It's been a long time.
It's been a very long time. And it's whenever I see that quote going around on Instagram, you know, my ability to remember phrases and lyrics from old songs or old movies far outweighs my ability to remember anything important now. That's just a classic example of it.
Yes, that is good.
That is very, very, very true. So greetings and salutations. A happy new year. How long is it, right? I should probably Google this. I don't actually know the answer. But how long is it before you stop saying happy new year to people? What's the cutoff point? Does anybody know? I don't know. So this year
Is there an official?
I'm going to Google it.
Okay. Well, this year I decided I wasn't going to say it. If someone says it to me, I'll say it back, but I'm just not going to do it.
Why is that?
I don't know, because I don't know when the cutoff is, and I don't know what the etiquette is around saying Happy New Year. Do you say it until it's the first time you see someone in the new year? But you could be saying it up till March, April.
Yeah, I mean, that's the point. Is there a cutoff date? Is there a cut-off date? So I've asked the internet, who is doing its thing. I still can't believe you don't say Happy New Year to people. It's a bit bar humbug.
It's just this year I've decided that.
Okay, so there's no universally agreed upon cut-off date for saying Happy New Year. But social norms and etiquette provide some general guidelines. Many people consider the first week of January as the most appropriate time to extend New Year greetings. By January the 7th, it starts to feel less timely as the festive season winds down. Epiphany on January the 6th. Some align the cut-off with Epiphany, a traditional end to the holiday season in many cultures. There you go. Others feel it's acceptable until mid-January. Yeah, I'm not one of them.
No.
More lenient views allow to the end of January. Yeah, I'm not one of them either. What's the date today? We're recording on the 8th. So, so today's the last day then. For me. I'm not saying Happy New Year 20. I'm going to be like Sadaf. I'm not saying Happy New Year 21 after this date.
I do respond if someone says Happy New Year to me.
Whatever. Was it a bar humbug?
I'm just not going to instigate it this year.
Yeah. Do you feel good about that decision?
Yeah.
Yeah?
I'm sticking to it. And also, actually, I haven't seen anyone. Just an email, so it's
okay, fair play. So you don't even say it in email greetings?
No,
Wow. Yeah, I think after off air we need to have a conversation. Okay. Bit of the holiday spirit.
All right.
Anyway, so I'm going to go with today as the last day.
Okay.
That we say Happy New Year. In fact, it probably should have been yesterday, but given that we're recording today, we may as well say Happy New Year. But this is going out on Tuesday.
It is.
Because we're a little bit behind.
Well, actually, Matt, if I can remind you, we did our Happy New Year episode already.
Did we?
It went out on Tuesday.
Well done
this
me.
Week. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, everybody. This is the whole introduction. Just totally ignore it. That's really funny. Well, this is going out on Tuesday. What's the date? I say the 8th. So whatever Tuesday is. The 14th. So you've just heard me say on the 14th, Happy New Year, which is way past
the 7th or the 8th.
Maybe we should just re-record the whole intro.
No, we're sticking to it.
Okay, fair play. All right. Well, anyway, Happy New Year, regardless of what it is. I personally wish you joy, peace, and happiness and cheer in the new year, as I like to wish everybody a happy new year, unlike my co-host, who's a bit bar humbug. Anyway, we've got Jason.
We do.
Awesome. So let's get Jason on, and then Sadaf and I will be back to talk about Jason's top tips after this. Here we go.
How has it evolved?
Yeah, so we started out, there's been many evolutions, but we started out with a once a week. Well, actually, it's interesting. I started out with a mono podcast, meaning it was just me speaking to the camera. It was me telling my stories. It was me speaking from my knowledge. It was me speaking from my experiences and the hard-fought lessons of being in the industry for over 20 years. And I found that pretty rapidly became unsustainable. It was too difficult to come up with constantly new angles on the same types of topics. And although I have a deep pool of knowledge and experience in e-commerce, I don't have experience across every single facet of e-commerce because it's a very broad topic. It's a very broad subject, and there's many deep specializations within e-commerce that you can explore. And so I pretty rapidly, after the first, I think it was 30 episodes or so, I had to pretty rapidly pivot into an interview style podcast. So that was the first major change. Went from a solo podcast, me looking at the camera, me talking about my experiences, to me doing interviews and talking with experts in their fields, and oftentimes in areas that I was not an expert in. Two, we made the pivot. So initially we had one podcast episode a week, what was very infrequent to start with. Then we standardized onto one episode a week talking about specific e-commerce technology. But latterly, and this is within the last couple of years, we added 2 new episodes per week to the podcast. We now release 3 episodes a week. Monday is a mentorship episode, which is I occasionally will have guest mentors on the podcast to talk about specific topics, but most of those episodes come from my one-to-one mentorship. I have a free mentorship program, a free e-commerce mentorship program, where I will record snippets of those mentorship sessions with my guests, and then I will collate all of those together around a specific topic and then put those out as a Monday episode. Cool. Then we added the Wednesday episode, which is a B2B commerce focused episode. And that was added after the mentorship episodes because I noticed a massive shift in the industry starting a couple of years ago, which is B2B e-commerce really started to come into its own. It started to become a thing. Specialists from that world really started to get religion around putting out content. And so it really became a focus of my consulting, and therefore it became a focus of my content. So we still have the Friday episode, which is a tech-focused episode, which is kind of the OG episode. But now we have those 2 additional episodes a week, mentorship and B2B. So that's kind of how it's evolved over the years. And we're now at over 400 episodes, and it's very, very exciting.
Yeah, it sounds, it does sound really cool because I see, listening to you speak, I can see that you're responding to what's happening in the industry and where you see the gaps are and where the needs are. So I can imagine that you would be, those conversations would be very valuable to your listeners.
And valuable to me. I'm not going to lie. I get a chance to speak to people that are absolutely geniuses in their field, people of every color, shape, size, gender, and coming from very different facets of the industry than I do. And so it's an opportunity for me to do deep learning on specific facets of our industry that I don't know enough about. And so it absolutely is, it's not just a chance for my audience to learn, but it's absolutely equally a chance for me to learn about in deeper ways. Despite the fact that I've been doing this 24 years, the reality is there's no way you can learn everything, right? It's really difficult. And so being able to speak to experts in their specific field is something that is massively rewarding for me, just to make sure that I am staying at the cutting edge of my industry as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And going back to what we were saying before, tapping into some of these people that you wouldn't otherwise have had an opportunity to speak to, the podcast is great for that, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. And also, what I like to do is I like to give my guests a platform to speak to the world that they might not otherwise have, because I have had the privilege of meeting a lot of these people at conferences, private events, dinners, activations, things like that. So I'm very fortunate in that I speak at a lot of conferences. I go to a lot of events. I lead a lot of events. I help to judge e-commerce competitions, and I try to be as involved in my community as I can possibly be. And by virtue of that, I get access to people that I may not otherwise get access to. But by the same token, those same amazing individuals don't often have a platform of their own. So unless they've got a podcast, or unless they've got a newsletter, or unless they're speaking at conferences or whatever it might be, oftentimes their knowledge is kind of just stays trapped up here, except for maybe the individual clients they work with on a daily basis. And so what another goal of my podcast is to expand the hive mind of knowledge in our community by giving a platform to people that otherwise wouldn't have a platform to speak out about their knowledge and share their knowledge with the wider world. Because I believe that a rising tide floats all boats. And so the more that we share our knowledge, the better we collectively as an industry we get, the more trustworthy we become, and the more trusting the buying community becomes. And therefore it benefits us all. It actually grows the pie. So that's another main goal that I have with the podcast.
If that got you curious and you want to catch the full episode, be sure to subscribe to the show. We've got plenty more great conversations coming up.
Welcome back. Firstly, thank you, Jason. Love that. As he was talking, about moving from this sort of solo podcast to the interview podcast, I looked at the stats, right? There's currently 4 key main podcast formats that people are favoring. So there's the solo podcast, there's the interview podcast, there's the co-host podcast, and then there's the round table podcast. And I've seen all of these coming out a lot more than the solo, I would say. So it's amazing how many people start with the solo podcast and then sort of migrate to the interview style, because one, it's just a lot easier to create that content. And two, like Jason said, you get to ask people who know more than you in different areas, all kinds of questions, which we'll come to. But I thought it was really interesting, this sort of breakdown. And so, and it's about, it's not exactly, but it's about, I guess, a third solo, a third interview, a third co-host, and a little bit round table. It's like 5% round table or something like that, I think. And the round table ones are becoming more and more popular because they're easier to do. But yeah, I just thought that was really interesting. So there you go. If you're wondering what podcast formats do, you'll be doing the solo podcast. In some respects, is the easiest way, I think, to get started. Yeah. Because it's just you and a microphone. But I think it creates the possibility of the clunkiest episodes because it's just you and a microphone. Unless you've got that, you're practiced at it, you're versed at it, you know what you're doing, you know how to keep people engaged, you know how to write scripts that are engaging. When we first started the e-commerce podcast, my story is very similar to Jason's, isn't it? It was just me rambling away. You can go listen to those episodes; they're still up, and they're okay. But like Jason, I was like, actually, I think by the time I got to episode 20, we're like, let's just do interview format because it just it was 20, 30 somewhere around. I can't remember exactly, but like Jason, I was like, man, the interview thing is so much easier. And we've talked about the benefits of doing interview podcasts quite a lot on this show, haven't we? From like what Jason was talking about. One of the key ones is actually you can go after specific people and pick their brains. So I do this on EP. So very similar podcast to Jason in many ways, where you go and get experts. And I spend most of my time, if you watch the videos, with my head down writing notes, because I just learn so much from each episode. From these great guests that come on and share usually share their wisdom and their knowledge. And it is a great feature of the interview podcast. You must have found that doing the interviews with these guys.
Yeah, I have. I think also, I'm not sure if all podcasts need to evolve from solo to interview to
that's true.
Panel to whatever you said.
Roundtable.
I don't think because I think a lot of it has to do with your audience and what works. So the content of what you're talking about and who you're talking to. Like when we talk about the round table, I think of Awesome Pod.
Yeah, they do a great job.
And they do a great job, yeah. And I think it really works well for their audience.
Yeah.
For the e-commerce, for those in the e-commerce space, because they get like a well-rounded view of e-commerce in every episode, which is really good.
They get there's 4 of them, isn't there? And
there's 4 of them.
They all have very strong opinions.
Yeah.
And they don't always agree.
No, which is good.
Which is
really good.
Yeah.
And I also remember the one that I did with Matthew Holman, and he's got a bit of both. So he does a solo episode and then an interview, a solo and an interview. So again, I think it doesn't have to evolve.
No, it doesn't. And I don't know if I would say the interview is necessarily better than solo. I think if you're wanting to use your podcast as a networking tool, as a way to connect with new people, which is one of the methods that we espouse, then I think absolutely you have to do the interview. Yeah. But we were talking about this last year, and we've certainly not made any decisions on it with EP, whether we increase the content on e-commerce podcast, and whether actually, because we do an episode a week, and you listen to people like Jason's doing 3. I mean, that's prolific amount of content he's putting out there. But actually, it's not that difficult for me to sit and create a solo episode. And so that format, like Matthew Holman, where you have an interview, you have a solo episode, you have an interview, you have a solo episode. And actually that solo episode would then give me all the content I need that week for LinkedIn. It would get, do you know what I mean? There's so much you can use that and repurpose that content for. And so that's something I'm toying with in the back of my mind. Because the more content you put out there, it seems if your show's good and the format works, the better it ultimately is.
Yeah.
So
and what Jason has done now, he evolved from the solo to interview to now doing a mentorship one, a B2B one, a tech one, and listening to him, it's like he's adapting and staying relevant to his audience. Yeah. So he's being able to cater more and more to their needs by creating these extra episodes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, again, we've talked about this with EP, haven't we? Whereby we currently have what we call an expert interview, where we have that segment. That's our current format of the show. We've been toying around with this idea of getting founders onto the show, and we've had a few founders come onto the show, and we've started playing around with that, which gives us even more content. And then there was the sort of the third channel, which was, so we have the experts, we have the founders telling their story, and then I was going to do this sort of solo, just talking about whatever I wanted to talk about that week, hopefully to do with e-commerce and hopefully interesting. And I see the benefit of each type of episode. Certainly for me, the founders episodes, I'm really excited by doing those and growing those over the next 12 months, which will in effect double the amount of content we put out. So do we go to a twice weekly episode show? I don't know. We'll see. We're going to figure it out as we go along. But yeah, I think there are these different formats. I would love to do like a round table podcast, because it's the one we don't do. I've done the solo. We this is a co-hosted podcast, which I quite enjoy. It's quite fun, usually at your expense.
I know.
We do a lot of the interview style podcasts by far. I mean, that's a majority of podcasts. We don't do the round table, but I think that could be quite fun to do with some fun people. Yeah. And I quite like the idea of doing a podcast. So all our podcasts are very targeted. So one is an e-commerce podcast. One is a leadership podcast. We've got this one about podcasting. Part of me would like to do a podcast that just has no real agenda. We just talk about whatever. Do you know what I mean? Politics, religion. I don't care. Just what's going on in the news, have an opinion about something, and did you see what they said? And just doing that with 3 or 4 of your mates, like you're in the pub, I think could be quite entertaining. I don't think there would be any commercial value in many ways, but unless we were just like so outrageous and got, millions of listeners. But I mean, all of that said, coming back to this point, you don't, like you say, have to migrate from solo to interview. I think you've got to do the format that works for you, but there are benefits to doing the interview style podcast, as there are benefits doing this co-hosted podcast, right? So when I start rambling on, you just kick me under the table.
like right now. So let's move on since you're rambling on.
Again.
Yeah. So, and the other thing I was thinking about, what he said in here, that I thought was important, that sharing knowledge is, how is it? He said it, a rising tide.
Floats all boats.
Floats all boats. Yeah, I thought that was really good too. Like, because you are sharing so much knowledge. He's learning from experts, and he's learning. You said you were too in your podcast, that it's helping everyone grow in their areas.
Yeah, it is. And this is why I think if you do a podcast, going on other people's podcasts is super helpful. Because one, you're sharing what you know, and two, actually, you're getting to see what it's like to be a guest on a podcast, which I think is quite helpful, because you start to see life through the eyes of your guest. But yeah, I'm a big believer in the rising tide floats all boats. We use it. It's a phrase you hear in e-commerce a lot. Like, should I be on the Amazon platform? Is that going to take away sales from my website? Well, rising tide floats all boats. And usually what happens is the more sales you get on Amazon, the more web sales you get, the more web sales you get, the more Amazon sales you get. Not always the case, obviously, but it's an idea that makes a lot of sense. So I think, and the other thing that I found, I don't know if Jason has found the same thing, but it's, the more I tell people like what we do, the more value I give, the more people want to work with me. The more open I am about what we do, the more people want us to do it. And I remember sort of seeing this for the first time. So we have a framework, an e-commerce framework, which we use in our coaching, as you know. But we have this framework. And that, I thought, for the longest time was my private IP. We'd go into coaching clients and I'd tell them about it and all that sort of stuff. But I never really put it out into the world because it was my private IP. You have to pay for this knowledge. This is hard-fought, hard-earned knowledge. And then I remember the first time sitting down with a potential client who's now a very good client of ours. And I sat down with them and they were like, what do you think we should do with a website? And I just went through the framework with them, told them the framework. Give them a step-by-step thing on how to get out of the situation that they were in without them paying me a single dime, right? Didn't pay me a penny. I was totally open with them. And they're like, great, can you do that for us? It was the easiest sale in the world in many ways. And I think using a podcast to promote your IP, you might think, well, my competition's just going to rob that. They're going to rob it anyway. If it's any good, they're going to rob it anyway. And let's be real, if it's any good, somebody else already knows it, because it's not like I'm the only one in the world that knows this stuff.
Yeah.
But what it does do is I found it gives people confidence that you know what you're talking about. And it's like, well, now I know what you're going to do. That's brilliant, but can you do it for me? That's what I want. And it's becoming more and more prevalent in the world, this idea of I tell you what to do, and then they say to you, great, can you please do that for me?
Yeah.
And I think it is super crucial. And I think this is a good thing you can do in your solo podcast episodes, is talk about your IP. So when I'm thinking and planning about maybe the solo episodes for e-commerce podcasts, they are pretty much centered around that same framework.
Yeah.
That we've had out in the world for a little while now. So, and just talking about what that means and figuring stuff out as a result of that, I think is quite important, because it just gives potential clients confidence to talk to you. And I see that with Jason. The more you put out there, the more value you put out there. And I see it actually on our own shows. We say this to guests, don't we, all the time? Listen, you can come on the show, you can be super salesy, or you could be super cagey, or you could just deliver insane value, right? And just give as much value as you possibly can. And if I look at guests who have been on the show who have then contacted me and said, Matt, I had a great response from people listening to your show, thanks so much. They were always the guests that delivered value. They were never the guests that were cagey. They were never the guests that were salesy. It was always like, I'm not here to sell my consulting. I'm not here to necessarily promote my company, although that's going to be a byproduct of being on. I'm going to tell you what we do at our company, how you can take what I have learned, implement it for yourself. And then if you want us to do that for you, great, we will gladly help you. But if you want to do it for yourself, this is how you do it. Those guests are by far the best guests to have. Yeah. And I think they always do the best. And so when I go on other people's podcasts, I'm always like, deliver the value and be super practical.
Yeah.
Because that's when you get people contact you and say, oh, I heard you on that show.
Yeah. And I think it also makes a better episode too, isn't it? Because the conversation just flows so much better.
Yeah.
Than if you're being salesy or cagey. But, something that I am working on, and I think is relevant to this conversation, is creating a trailer for our podcasts, or trailers for our podcast, and like promos as well. And I think what is good to do is to swap those with other podcasts that are in our niche. So I know this sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but to what the point you were making is that actually, sure, there are competition, but it's that whole, knowledge sharing thing. So yes, it's the same people that listen to that podcast might also listen to my podcast and someone else's podcast, all that are kind of in the same boat.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually an interesting way to approach it. So that's what I'm going to be working on in the next few weeks.
Okay. I'm curious to see how this works out for you.
Yeah. I recommend it. Do it. I haven't done it yet, but I think you should do it.
I haven't done it yet, but it was an idea that I've had. So it's really
actually,
good
it's not my idea. I have I can't claim it, but I have been reading about the benefits of having trailers and promos, and how it's actually really helpful.
Really helpful.
Yeah.
Especially for organic growth.
Yeah.
Yes, and you can use those trailers and promos in paid media.
Yeah.
As well. So so there's multiple reasons why I think you could get away with creating those, or why you should maybe create those. Just to promote the episode and grow the audience. Yeah. Because I think with podcasting now, I mean, I know we're going slightly off piste here. I don't think it's a case of I've built this podcast, people will listen to it. I think you actively have to promote it. Yeah. And the way that Jason talked about it, interestingly, was he said he just wants to show up in his community wherever he can. And he brings those people onto his show. And so especially ones that have not really got their own platform, which I think is quite a clever strategy. Yeah. So he's speaking at events. I think he said he was judging e-commerce
panels and stuff.
Yeah, and he was doing all kinds of stuff, wasn't he? Competitions and things. So this idea of getting into your community deep and wide, to quote Andy Stanley, then I think actually makes a lot of sense. And so it is one way to connect with your audience. And ironically, the podcast, what I found is actually the more I do the podcast, the more events I get invited to speak at. The more events I get invited to speak at, the more the podcast grows. The more the podcast grows, the more event, and it becomes this sort of self-fulfilling prophecy in many ways. Virtuous cycle, that's maybe a better way to put it. But just starting to get out there in the community, I think is so important. And being a voice, being helpful, delivering value wherever you can, answering people's questions, whether that's on Reddit, whatever, just LinkedIn, people ask questions all the time, going on there, just offering some advice. It's amazing how just doing those simple things will grow your name in that community. It's not going to happen overnight, but it will grow your name in that community. Yeah. And doing that, you're actively promoting the podcast rather than just, I put this podcast out there and if people come, great. If they don't, I'm going to stop. Yeah. I need to promote it. And one of the ways to do that is promote it to especially if it's a niche community. I think it's a really good way to do that. Yeah. So I really enjoyed actually that comment that Jason was talking about. I thought that was really smart. Get involved in the community and bring those people from the community on your show. Yeah. Which is part of the reason why we're bringing founders onto the e-commerce podcast. Not the only reason, but one of the key reasons why we want to start doing the founder episodes. So yeah, I thought that was super smart. Yeah. Anything else?
No.
Are you sure? You're awake still?
I am.
You just look very, very laid back there.
I am very comfortable in this chair.
Yeah. These chairs actually are quite dangerous. This is really hard. You just like...
No.
I appreciate I've got this sort of deep baritone voice going on at the moment. It's not always like this, but I think it's sort of the post-Christmas holidays. And it is freezing today in Liverpool, and I think it's just got into my vocal cords. Anyway, maybe I should do the midnight radio. Midnight radio show. We're going to do the love songs. Maybe do one of those very quickly. But what we got coming up next week?
More Jason Greenwood.
More Jason Greenwood. Yeah. Do you know what Jason's talking about next week?
Yes, but I cannot remember what it is.
I know because I was there in the interview. It's a stupid question, Matthew. Can I recall? No, not at all. which because it's not like I'm not going to ask you that question.
I know, but
Preparation and all that. Very, very professional here. But yeah, no, that's cool, man. So more Jason Greenwood coming up next week, which I'm very, very excited about. I really like my conversation with Jason that we had on EP. So do go check it out if you want to hear his story a little bit more. But Jason just seems like he's a brother from another mother. We've got very similar podcasting stories and very similar sort of journeys, which is great. Mm-hmm. And so do connect with him, do shout out, do go and ask him any questions. I'm sure Jason will more than happily answer them for you. But yeah, that's it from me. That's it from you.
Yeah.
Is that right? Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a fantastic week and we will see you next time. Bye for now.
And that brings us to the end of today's episode at Podjunction. If you've enjoyed the insights from this episode and want to hear the full conversation with today's special guest, don't forget to visit podjunction.com where you'll find more information about how you can join Podjunction cohort. Whether you listened while on the go or in a quiet moment, thank you for letting us be a part of your day. Remember, every episode is a chance to gain insights and to transform your business with podcasting. So keep on tuning in, keep on learning, and until next time, happy podcasting.